The market is struggling quite badly recently, but Ethereum is underperforming the rest. Ethereum is doing worse than Bitcoin, it's doing worse than most other altcoins. The question is, how much longer will this last? Let's have a look at the data most people aren't considering. Let's try to figure out at what point it might sense to buy back into Ethereum. Because fundamentally, the trend seems to be fine. Here's the number of active addresses on the Ethereum blockchain. Over the years, this tends to slowly go up. Over here is the number of transactions on the Ethereum chain. Again, the long-term trend looks positive. The tokenomics recently very much resemble what's going on with Bitcoin. So both Bitcoin and Ethereum are slightly inflationary by roughly 0.8% per annum. And there's a good chance that actually more than that supply gets lost every year. So net, we might be looking at a shrinking supply. Yet, with the recent downturn, the capital that's on the Ethereum chain is coming down as well. So that's the TVL, the total value locked on ETH measured in US dollars. It topped at very similar levels to the peak of DeFi summer in 2021 that then turned around due to the collapse of Terra Luna and then subsequently FTX. Measured in Ethereum, the TVL has already peaked in April of this year. Now, we saw a lot of turnarounds in April of this year for Ethereum. April was also the month where the narrative of Ethereum treasury companies started to pick up. What we see over here is Bitcoin's market cap relative to Ethereum's market cap. It tends to trade in a range. The upper bound is when Bitcoin is roughly 9.5 times larger than Ethereum. The lower bound is when it's only 1.8 times larger. The dotted line over here, that's the average ratio, which is at 4.1x roughly. So this is when Tom Lee or Bitmine started to buy Ethereum. That's when Bitcoin underperformed ETH by more than 50%. But let's have a look at what's happening recently. Since the end of August, Bitcoin tends to outperform Ethereum again. The bottoms and the tops align quite well. And so the treasury company story seems to have run its course. Ethereum dominance is coming down again. So ETH, measured as a fraction of all of crypto, is on the decline. It tends to trade between 21% and 7%. And let's try to explain those 4 turnaround points. First, the bottoming in September of 2019, then the top in September of 2022, and then of course the bottoming again in April of this year. We already talked about this. Now have a look at the bottom here. This is the Bitcoin price during the same time period. So Ethereum tends to underperform when Bitcoin is in a bear market. It also underperformed at the first leg of recovery. Now that might be surprising for some, right? Some people think that Ethereum is simply just a levered version of Bitcoin. When crypto is going up, Ethereum should do better than Bitcoin. When crypto is going down, then Ethereum tends to bleed more than Bitcoin. But that's not always the case. And I think the reason for that is that when the market recovers from a bear, when there are the first few people that buy the bottom, then it's usually Bitcoin that gets purchased the first. And that's because with Bitcoin, we can afford to hold longer, right? Even if we are in a bear market, even if things continue to decline, we can just expand our time horizon. Bitcoin will recover at some point. That's not necessarily true for Ethereum. So usually at the beginning of a bear market recovery, Bitcoin still tends to do better until the market gets more risk on again. And that took one more year when Bitcoin was already at 10K. So it recovered from 3.5K to 10K. It made a 3x. That's when Ethereum dominance bottomed. And that's when Ethereum did better than Bitcoin. But why did it then turn around over here in September of 2022? It appears as if that was the sell the news event. As in, Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake. It improved its tokenomics, so the number of newly issued Ethereum went down. But since the price rallied already quite a bit before that, the event itself was an opportunity to take profit. And so ETH tended to sell off. People continue to take profit just until we hit again the historical low that was already established in September of 2019. And this is also when then Tom Lee bought the Ethereum. And why is Ethereum struggling again? It's because Tom Lee is reducing the purchases. This is the bought Ethereum by public companies. Bitmine is buying the vast majority. When we exclude Bitmine from this chart, we can already see how the purchases have stopped at the beginning of September. By the way, if you so far enjoy this content and you don't want to miss future videos, then feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly over here. And so really, since then, Ethereum dominance is having a hard time, and very likely this momentum will prevail. It's even more likely to prevail in case we really enter a bear market now. If Bitcoin continues to fall, then very likely Ethereum dominance will go down with it. It has done so during prior bear markets. How low could Bitcoin fall? At least until the realized price, right? The average cost basis. This is how low it tended to fall in prior bear markets. Currently, the realized price is at $56,000. Ethereum still seems to be expensive relative to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is creeping up versus ETH. It also seems to be expensive relative to the altcoins. This here is the Ethereum market cap relative to the others market cap. Now, the others market cap is all the cryptocurrencies that are not in the top 10. We are in a somewhat constant trading range, and ETH could easily underperform the altcoin market by 42%. Now, others is one of the metrics for the altcoin market. There's another one called Total 3, and that measures all of crypto except Bitcoin and Ethereum. So we're not excluding the top 10, we are only excluding Bitcoin and ETH. It's again a somewhat consistent range, and again, Ethereum can underperform by 29%, potentially even by 37% from here. If you bought into the Ethereum treasury company hype, and you got into Tom Lee's Bitmine, you'd now be down by more than 80%. Maybe you even got a 2x levered version of that. So there is BM and G. Over the course of less than a month, that went down by 80%. Treasury companies face a fundamental problem. They are buying cryptocurrency based on the cryptocurrency they already hold. So when currently prices are very high, that means their collateral is worth a lot. That means they can borrow more against their collateral. That means they can buy again. If prices are very low, then the collateral isn't worth much, and so they have a much harder time buying. So they cannot really buy the bottoms. They are forced to buy the tops. We have seen this with MicroStrategy as well. During the bear market, when Bitcoin was at 20K, MicroStrategy barely increased its exposure to Bitcoin. But once Bitcoin hit new all-time highs, that's when Michael Saylor was able to buy new BTC. And Tom Lee's Bitmine will very likely be in the same spot, as in they can't buy more ETH when the stock is crashing that much in line with the Ethereum price. Ethereum has to hit a new all-time high for Tom Lee to buy again. And so while very long-term Ethereum is still getting used, while very long-term we do have adoption, especially in the stablecoin market, that does not mean that the price can't fall by another 30, 40, 50%. The problem is really the medium-term momentum. The problem is really we do not have any marginal buyer here. We might see a buyer again once Ethereum dominance hits the 7% mark again. But until we don't see those obviously cheap prices, it's likely going to continue to underperform. Who is going to buy Ethereum when Bitcoin outperforms ETH that constantly in the last months? And who is going to buy Ethereum when even the altcoins tend to be a better bet right now? Who is going to buy Ethereum when the tokenomics aren't that much better compared to Bitcoins? And Bitcoin is the safer long-term hold, especially during a bear market. Recently, I do get the comments that I'm a permanent bear, that I'm always just talking bad about cryptocurrencies. But have a look at the prior history on this channel. Have a look at the videos on Ethereum in April and May of this year. I'm only bearish on an asset when prices aren't necessarily cheap, when it's warranted to be bearish. I try to be different on this channel. I try to be as objective as possible. I simply share my opinion, even if that's not necessarily always positively perceived, because most people just want to get their bias confirmed. Most people just want to hear how prices will go up. But I don't think they always go up, right? It's important to time the market. If you appreciate that honesty, then feel free to give this a like. Feel free to also subscribe. I publish videos regularly. Feel free to also check out the premium membership. This is where I share my own trades. We are currently making money with that bear market. So a link to premium pops up over here on the screen. See you next time on YouTube or see you on premium. Cheers.